The following is a list of former primary state highways completely or mostly within the Lynchburg District, VDOT District 3 of the U.S. state of Virginia. State Route 126, 1928 to 1944. State Route 126 was a westerly alternate to US 501 between Volans and Gladys, following present State Route 603 from Volans to State Route 40 at Cody and State Route 761, mostly the old Pittsylvania and Lynchburg Turnpike, from the Roanoke River south of Long Island to Gladys. The road from Cody to Long Island was never a primary state highway. Most of the distance from Volans to Cody became State Route 303 in 1928, with the remaining 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, at the Cody end joining it in 1929. 5.8 miles, 9.3 kilometers, of the northern segment were added in 1932 as State Route 323. Both routes became State Route 126 in the 1933 renumbering, and in October 1933 the northern segment was extended south to the Roanoke River. The southern segment from Volans to Cody and most of the northern segment from the Roanoke River to State Route 699 were downgraded to secondary in 1943, the former becoming an extension of existing State Route 603, and the remaining 1.8 miles, 2.9 kilometers, from State Route 699 to Volans followed in 1944. State Route 126, 1930 to 1979. State Route 126 extended west from US 460, now US 460 Business, in southwestern Lynchburg along Graves Mill Road. State Route 1425 outside Lynchburg, to US 221 at Clay, east of Forest. It was mostly added to the state highway system in 1930 as part of State Route 319, with the westernmost 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, completing the route in 1932. State Route 319 became State Route 128 in the 1933 renumbering, but that route was split in 1948, with the central piece along Fort Avenue renumbered State Route 297 and the western piece becoming New Senior 126. An easterly extension along the new Lynchburg Expressway to US 29, now US 29 Business, was added in August 1964, but 2 months later it instead became State Route 297, with State Route 126 replacing State Route 297 from their intersection northeast on Fort Avenue to U.S. Route 29 alternate, now US 29 Business, which had been part of State Route 128 until 1948. This extension was renumbered again in 1976, becoming part of U.S. Route 460 Business, which it remains to this day. The portion of State Route 126 within Lynchburg city limits became an ordinary city street in 1977. And the short stub in Bedford County was downgraded to secondary in 1979. State Route 127. State Route 127 extended south from US 460, now US 221, at Forest to State Route 24 at Evington along current secondary State Route 811. The road was added to the state highway system as part of State Route 43 in 1928. State Route 43 was split among State Route 24 and State Route 127 in the 1933 renumbering, and the latter was downgraded to secondary in 1948. Major intersections: State Route 132. State Route 132 ran southwest from US 460 southeast of Appomattox to Evergreen along part of current State Route 630. It was added to the state highway system in 1932 as State Route 326. became State Route 132 in the 1933 renumbering, and was downgraded to secondary in 1943, initially becoming an extension of existing State Route 681. State Route 135. State Route 135 extended from US 360 at Green Bay north to US 460 southeast of Farmville along current State Route 696. 5.5 miles, 8.9 kilometers, from the Green Bay end was added to the state highway system in 1930 as State Route 318, which was extended north 1/2 mile, 0.80 kilometers, in 1931 and the remaining 6 miles, 9.7 kilometers, in 1932. It was renumbered State Route 135 in the 1933 renumbering and downgraded to secondary in 1945. Senior 135I. A 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, connection northeast to US 360 along original State Route 20, which US 360 replaced. Swapped with State Route 135 by 1940. And its original route was downgraded to State Route 694 in 1943. Major intersections. The entire route is in Prince Edward County. State Route 152. State Route 152 was a spur from Wilbourn Avenue, now US 501 southbound, in South Boston to the former South Boston Airport, following Edmonds Street and Lomax Avenue. The route was added to the state highway system in 1931 as State Route 322. The portion within South Boston limits was defined in 1932, which became State Route 152 in the 1933 renumbering and was downgraded to secondary State Route 852 in 1942. State Route 158. State Route 158 extended north and east along present State Route 778 from US 60 between Sandwiches and Sardis via Louisville to Shady Lane, and then continued east to US 29 at Colleen along present State Route 56. The first 1.75 miles, 2.82 kilometers, of road west from Shady Lane was added to the state highway system in 1927 as State Route 182, a spur of State Route 18, which followed present State Route 151 through Shady Lane. It became State Route 313 in the 1928 renumbering, and a 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, extension to the county line at Louisville was added later that year, along with a second section northeast from current US 60. The 1.1 mile, 1.8 kilometers, gap at Louisville was filled in 1930, making a continuous route from near Sardis to Shady Lane. In 1931 and 1932, State Route 313 was extended northeast from Shady Lane to State Route 18, now State Route 6, near Nelliesford, replacing a former alignment of State Route 18 through Lanes Ford and the entirety of State Route 315. A 7.7 miles, 12.4 kilometers, gap in this addition was filled in 1932. The entire length of State Route 313 became State Route 151 in the 1933 renumbering, but in 1947 it was split at Shady Lane due to the realignment of US 29, which had replaced that part of State Route 18. State Route 151 was rerouted south from Shady Lane on what had been US 29 towards Amherst, while the portion west and south from Shady Lane was combined with old US 29 east to Colleen to become a new State Route 158. The part of State Route 158 west of Shady Lane was downgraded to secondary in 1954. The remainder kept its number until 1970, when it became part of State Route 56 in place of a proposed more direct alignment on State Route 655 through Roseland. which had not been a primary highway since State Route 14 was removed from it in about 1930. State Route 283. State Route 283 extended north from State Route 56 north of Denton's Corner along present secondary State Route 602 in the direction of Howardsville, ending about 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, south of Glenmore. The first portion of State Route 283 became a state highway in 1930 when State Route 306 was extended northwest from Buckingham, overlapping State Route 13 to Denton's Corner and then continuing north for 2.5 miles, 4.0 kilometers. A further extension of 1.1 mile, 1.8 kilometers, in 1932 took it to the present junction of State Route 601 near Mount Vinco. In the 1933 renumbering, this extension of State Route 306 became State Route 283, the highest state route number assigned at the time, with the exception of the southernmost 1 mile, 1.6 kilometers, which was instead part of State Route 56. It was extended a further 3 miles, 4.8 kilometers, in 1937 and 1.2 miles, 1.9 kilometers, in 1938. But only 4 years later the northern 3.1 mile, 5.0 kilometers, were downgraded to secondary as an extension of existing State Route 602. The job was finished the next year. In 1943, major intersections. The entire route is in Buckingham County. State Route 297. State Route 297 was the designation for Linkhorn Drive in what is now part of the city of Lynchburg, running east from Old Forest Road. Then State Route 291. At Forest Hill to a dead end and a proposed connection to Langhorne Road, US 501, barely inside Lynchburg. It was added to the state highway system in 1935 and downgraded to secondary in 1942.